Sitoki, mimi nitaenda nirudi tena. Niende nirudi tena. Niende nirudi tena. Watu tuanze kuzoeana. Ama namna gani? Si tuanze kuzoeana. Kwa sababu sisi wote ni wa Kenya. Ama namna gani Homa Bay?
All right, so very animated, I should say, sound bites there. The Deputy President obviously reacting to what has been happening the last 24 hours, we should say, from that incident in Kondele to the claims by the police that there was some money involved, all the way to what the ODM leader said this morning, that he had no part in that, and all the political voices that we've had this afternoon. Many different narratives, Francis, coming out of this incident that happened in Kondele when the Deputy President went there.
Absolutely, and regardless of whatever narratives will come out of it, it is important to say from the onset, the wave of political violence prior to the general election next year is worrying. It's a red flag. It should concern everybody because those are telltale signs of what is likely to happen next year. And we've been there. We were there in 2007, 2008, and we all know what happened. And if we remember well, certain things relate in the run-up to the 2007 general election, and the violence after it started with those small things like we see today. And so it should worry everybody. And then the question of money. Does money play a key role in political mobilization? Yes, it does. Is there a question about use of money in Kondele? Certainly. Speaking to guys on the ground, they're saying there were two opposing sides, two opposing groups, if I may call it. Some say they were given a certain amount of money, and others demanded an even bigger amount of money. And so there was a question also, we are also being told there was a question of distribution of resources that had been donated by the Deputy President. All those are theories that need to be examined, investigated by the police. On the other hand, the Kondele chaos have triggered a political debate. You saw what was happening in Parliament today. One group of MPs that are allied to Deputy President, as soon as they finished their news conference, the pro-handshake team were there. That war of words is unnecessary, because what it does, it covers the real situation on the ground, the real cause of violence. And I think that's where the police need to get the country on the clear radar, what really happened. I hope they can, and not just in Kondele, but also cases of violence that we have witnessed in this campaign period, be it Keno, be it Narumoro, be it Githurai, be it Kisii, all those places. And I think it is important to tame it and arrest those who are perpetuating this violence. Otherwise, it will be normalized and we will not get to the bottom of it. So it's a serious issue. And the question of money, once again, very fundamental.
Linus, this has to be worrying. I mean, whatever the cause of that violence was, it should be possible for politics to be a bit more civil than what we are seeing.
Absolutely. And what I'm curious about is the statement by the police, a very short statement of 5 points. And it says, in part, His Excellency the Deputy President, Dr. William Ruto, is touring Nyanza region on a political campaign trail. Let me go to number 2. Based on intelligence gathered, there was tension within Kondele owing to alleged distribution of campaign logistical funds amongst local groups. This intelligence was promptly shared by the police with His Excellency the Deputy President's team, with recommendation to skip the affected area during the tour. I think there is a statement, and here is my curiosity. When you have such intelligence, do you advise cancellation of a campaign rally, or as a police service, you make it safe for that to go ahead? you make it possible for that violence to be forestalled. Basically, you are saying you have the intelligence. So why do you advise the DP to avoid the area instead of going to secure that area?
And even if that had happened, I mean, sometimes they may say the period between the time they have the intelligence and the time the DP is supposed to go there, because that's an argument that sometimes the police make, which is, remember when they would advise that on security grounds, this place is not safe, and all of those things. But this is 24 hours later. We haven't seen them say, these are the people who had been given logistical funds, whatever they're calling it, and therefore they are the ones who instigated, because intelligence should be so
actionable
and actionable for you to get to a point of advising the Deputy President of the Republic that, hey,
cancel this.
That place is dangerous.
Here is what the statement exposes in a very unfortunate way. It exposes the police as a player in political violence in the country. Whether you're talking about the 2007 elections, whether you're talking about 2017 elections, or even the Kisumu incident, when you look at the history of political violence in this country, political violence primarily, first of all, is owned by the state. They are the most capable to cause the most, and in fact to cause the most damage. And this has been done, and what you do is you can use the police. But in the 90s, when now there's this pressure from the international community, and suddenly the Western donors are very interested in the standards of governance in countries, what happened then was the devolution, or rather outsourcing of violence to groups. You know, militia, let's not call them militia, but vigilante groups, youth groups, and things like that. So the police, when you look at our history, they're not an innocent party. When you look at the 2007 elections, when you look at the 2017 elections, the most deaths have been caused by the state, by the police. That is the unfortunate thing about political violence. It's not accidental, it comes by design. When you look at what the DP went through, would he have gone through the same in 2017 if this meeting in Kondele was actually happening in 2017? It would not have happened. The police would have ensured that those stones would not be thrown. That there'll be a rally in Kondele and it shall be addressed by the DP and he'll leave the place. The problem with the country is we apply even the law and order in line with political affiliations and political, what can I call it? Political changes. You know, things change. And for DP, a lot has changed. He is not in the space he was in 2017. He is actually sitting in exactly the opposite of where he was in 2017. What Raila Odinga was complaining about in 2017 is what today William Ruto is going through. So it would include some of that political intimidation that is witnessed out there. It would also include what he's been going through with the issue of police, whether it's the withdrawal of GSU from his security detail at home, or even just an advice that, you know, skip this place, don't do a rally. These are political statements also, and an unfortunate political statement from the police. Now, we need to really rethink as a country, because the police need to be completely apolitical. Yeah. Completely objective. They can be able to protect every player and equally. Because when they don't do that, it only encourages things like this.
But also the politics that then comes and clouds the facts. Because I think that's also the other thing. I mean, I saw after this incident in Kisumu, when the DP went, I think it was to Rongo or something, and he very directly attributed this to Raila Odinga. I mean, he said the ODM leader. And you see, I mean, these people are all politicians, so anything can happen. But when there is a specific statement made about a specific political leader, it's something that ought to interest everybody, including the police. That is there something that the DP knows, some intelligence that he has? Because this is a serious thing, and therefore when something like that happens and there are statements like that, I'm hoping that either the DP has some specific information to that regard, that if it is Raila Odinga who organized what happened in Kisumu, that's something that the police will be pursuing very vigorously. They ought to, because violence is a very serious thing. I mean, if it is not true that it was just part of the politics, then it doesn't help the situation, because what will happen is that his supporters will take it as fact, and therefore it means that the next time someone else goes to campaign somewhere else, it is very possible for something like that to happen. So it really should be important that when something like that happens, the politicians really need to hold their horses, because whatever they say can actually aggravate that situation, so that when Raila Odinga or some ODM person or whoever is associated with them goes campaigning somewhere else, I mean, people might look at it and say, yeah, you know, our leader, the DP, said that he was actually beaten, or his car was towed because this is the guy who organized it. What is he coming to do here? And that is actually something that can create a very, very worrying spiral.
And Joe, if you look at the spiral you're talking about, this is what, 9 months to the elections?
8, actually.
8 months to the elections, August 9th, Simbali, and there'll be a lot of activities from around February, March, that will actually make that period look shorter than it really is. But then now, what does that mean for now the remaining period of campaigns? Because they're going to intensify. Although we're already on election fever, we've been on it for the past few months. What does that mean going forward in terms of the perception, and like you talked about supporters, someone may go somewhere else and something like that or worse may happen. But then it reminds me of the formation of this multi-agency team that's been to oversee the preparedness for the next election, that comprises of Judiciary, the Interior Security Ministry, the IEBC and the NCIC. And there was this meeting that was condemned by some members of UDA, saying CSA should not involve themselves in issues to do with the election preparedness. But then they're like, oh, we are going to make sure that the elections are held in an atmosphere devoid of hate speech, intimidation and violence. The Interior Ministry promising to put more police officers on the ground. NCIC saying to take firm action against hate mongers. The Judiciary promising to set up special courts in various hotspots to prosecute those involved in violence. IBC threatening to bar politicians who incite violence or engage in other political malpractices. But for me, I look at history. So this is not the first time we're seeing violence during campaigns. It's happened before. But what has happened? What action has been taken against those who are seen to have instigated it, or the politicians who are even caught on camera inciting a crowd? You actually hear them wakisema hivyo, but other than pengine kuwa fine ama kuwa censure ama kuwa, nothing ever really happens. I don't know if we've really jailed any of these politicians because of that. Wanaachiliwa kwa dhamana mara nyingi. But so for me, I don't think action needs to be taken. I think really decisive and action that tunaona kwamba itafanyika ndio iwe funzo kwa wale wenye tabia kama hii, because otherwise kuanzia sasa na kwenda paka August 9th tutafanya nini?
And, you know, like Gashuri said, this is not the first time. In fact, wasn't it just last month that there was, again, some disruption and violence and chaos in Busia when the deputy president was campaigning there?
Corinda Junction or something like that.
Absolutely. And I think at the time 5 were arrested, and we heard from the CS Interior condemning that violence. And so we need to start to be careful about a few things. So one, obviously, violence. And then two, when it seems to be directed in one specific area, one specific direction, one specific candidate. And that is why, like Joe was saying, it is imperative that the police get to the bottom of this, so that even in the political rhetoric that will follow, because, you know, no doubt, no matter how many times we tell politicians to be careful about some of the statements they make, they're going to do that anyway. But what's most important is if the police are able to come in and swiftly find the people who are responsible, and if, like they say, they already had intelligence. And for me, that statement almost read like a justification, or like, you know, and I told you so, or
told
like,
you, yes.
you know, you're on your own, which
You
is
should have listened.
You should have listened. It's very important that this, you know, does not continue to happen, you know, even to the point of saying we are investigating the matter. But for them, it's, we knew it was going to happen. We told you it was, you know, this was going to happen in Kondele. You went anyway, and here's the result. And it ends by saying, whilst it's thankful, maybe I'm reading too much into it, but the tone was, well, at least there were no injuries. At least there were no deaths, which is great. But, you know, after the entire statement, it doesn't quite read well for the police. And so what needs to happen now is very swift action, arrests that need to be made. In any case, which investigations, and they already have intelligence.
You see,
look, we can say we're lucky these are the low intensity type of violence, because when you look at how violence has played out in our election circles, it's either low intensity or really high intensity. We had high intensity violence in 2007. We had high intensity violence in 1992, where people are actually completely displaced from the areas they live in. And normally the purposes are entirely political. They are supposed to create particular outcomes, whether you want to reduce the number of people we call immigrants in other constituencies so that the vote can go a certain way. And in 1997, I covered the attack on Likoni police station. Something very, very curious, that people came from nowhere and burnt down the Likoni police station. And we reached there, and the police were hostile to everybody, including ourselves. And I had my first beating from the police outside the station at Likoni. And Likoni violence in 1997 spoke to organized violence, because the group that was supposedly carrying out these attacks on people from up country was called the Kaya Bombo team. And we went looking for them and all that. And the argument and a lot of accounts actually say this was deliberate on the part of government at the time to tolerate that, because the election was going to be decided by a very tricky thing called 25% in at least 5 out of the 8 provinces. And the cost was actually considered to be
a swing vote,
yes, that can potentially go to the opposition and deny someone the 25% requirement. And so some of these things are actually by design. They serve particular purposes. Don't we remember Jeshi la Mzee? Don't we remember the KANU youth wingers that were manning, bus stops and imposing the will of their political masters? The problem is, the longer we wait, the closer we move to organized group violence with militias and vigilante groups. I mean, not long ago we had a CS talk favorably of a vigilante group. You know, some of these things people do jokingly. It's not impossible for the country also to go the same directions Haiti is in right now, where you have actually organized gangs that are controlling part of the political narrative in the country. It starts with these small things. Let Jeshi la Mzee get away with what they do. Let the youth wingers get away with what they do. Let Chinkororo thrive, you know, use them occasionally for political purposes. And this is a dangerous, dangerous path. We seem to bury our heads in the sand as a country, but political violence is actually just lying beneath the surface of our political body politic.
Joe, I look at it this way. First, that statement by the police yesterday was an own goal, if I may call it that way. It was an own goal because it seemed to justify that violence. It seems to like give credence and reasons to the violence. Even if there were two groups of youths fighting for money, I would think the best way to go about it would have been to say investigations are going on, or something like that. Because the police has been accused, especially by DP's team, of taking political sides. And so such statements seem to justify that narrative. And so moving forward, I think it would be important for the police and their communication team to be very cautious about certain things. And secondly, what we saw in Kondele and what we've seen in other areas is a telltale sign of what the police particularly need to do moving forward in relation to managing the campaigns and the violence that is likely to erupt in the course of these campaigns. Already, we are getting an indicator that next year's general election, especially the presidential race, is likely to be hotly contested. And so the role of police will come to play. It will be very significant. Significant in the sense that if you start having scenarios where candidate A cannot campaign in a certain area, candidate B cannot step in a certain area, then it becomes difficult. And the people to assure every candidate of their safety wherever they go in search of votes is the police, the security agencies, so to say. So I think they need to be more vigilant, more careful, regardless of any other factor, whether it's for political optics, either to deny one access or the other, or to deny them audience from certain regions or the other, or even as is being said, to seek political sympathy. All those issues will always be there. They will always be part of the political narrative. But at the end of the day, the police must stand tall and protect every candidate as they seek votes. Otherwise, we may end up with justifications of sort. See, you did this to our candidate, we will also do this. And so the police will be left in a scenario where if you didn't take action in A, then probably you have no more authority to take action in part B.
And then there's the question of money in all of these things. And I mean, it's a sad thing, Francis, that we haven't dealt with the question of campaign finances and where they come from, how they can be used, how much of it can be raised, and all of that, because there are all these stories that are coming out of this incident about different groups having been given money. I mean, we don't know the truth about this thing, but those are things that ought to be investigated, because if there is money that comes into a situation like that and ends up being at the center of chaos, then it means that it probably wasn't money just to go and buy a podium or something, hire a podium where people can stand, or buy perhaps fuel for the cars. It probably was money that was meant for something else. Usually in some political spaces they say ya kutengeneza ground. So it is
actually ni ya kupanga ground.
It is very possible that things like that will happen, and those are the things that at the end of the day can also be at the center of the kind of violence that we saw, because then people will have been motivated in a different way. There are people who might be mobilized, tokeni hapa, mwende hapa, and when any time that people are transported from one place to another, there's almost a guarantee that some form of violence will come about. So the role of money in this campaign is something that ought to be watched closely, and it is unfortunate that we do not have a proper regulatory framework when it comes to campaign money and what it can be used for, and whether that is something that should worry us as a country. And Jamila, we should be going for a break, I suppose.
Yeah, we're actually not going for a break. We're winding up the show.
Yeah, but I would have wanted to hear what Linus would say about the money factor, because I think 2-3 weeks ago we discussed the question of campaign financing, and you saw how the regulations were frustrated in Parliament. It was deliberate. It was not accidental, and there's a good reason, because across the political divide, the role of money is central. You will not just walk from one place to another to campaign just like that. There are resources that are required for logistical purposes, and even as you say, kupanga ground. That kupanga ground costs money. And I don't think, Joe, there is any one candidate who will move from one place to another without being sure of the kind of ground that they are going to find. And part of making that ground hospitable, receptive, money has a key role in that role. And probably, Joe, ask yourself, particularly in this scenario that we're talking about, why only Kondele? I mean, there were meetings in Juakali, in other places, in Rongo, in Migori. Why only Kondele? We've seen other places where all the candidates have campaigned. We've seen Raila Odinga campaign, we've seen the deputy president campaign, we've seen Kalonzo Musyoka, Jimmy, we've seen Musalia Mudavadi campaign, and they have not had problems. So there's a question of money, but that also cannot be a justification for violence. But the centrality of money in political campaign cannot be disputed, Linus.
Yes, I agree, Francis. Finances have always given this impression of they are surrounded by an air of impropriety. It's money that is not clean, whether the way it's been acquired or the way it's going to be spent. That is how we view cash in our elections. And look, starting with what media says of political players, you can see an analyst saying that so-and-so, candidate so-and-so, has built a war chest. because they're in government. They've built a war chest. You know, they've made some money from government. In my view, there's a very direct link between the looting of government coffers and our elections, because politicians actually go there, and this is what they scramble for. This is why they want these offices, because they think through either government tenders or direct looting, you can actually make a lot of money that then you justify by claiming that you are giving it back to people, either through fundraisers or something they call these days empowerment, facilitation, things like that. And some of that could even be in form of brown envelopes to journalists. I mean, it's money that goes anywhere. Let's face it, there's a very direct link between that unaccountable culture in our campaign financing and the levels of corruption in this country. You would hear all these politicians, and sometimes they could even be down in the counties where you have a governor defending a seat. And they always said, okay, to have more cash than
the other candidates.
Than the other guys. Where is their cash coming from? It's coming from this culture of looting public coffers. And it's so unfortunate. And that is why you saw politicians resisting, fighting tooth and nail, that you can't have that campaign finance, those campaign finance regulations, because you don't want light shade into that place. How about the spending itself? So if money is being given around, say a candidate A or aspirant A's and B are going to some place, and then you are giving out money to the youth, to the women, how does that sound in the books? What's that money for? Strictly speaking, it can be interpreted as voter bribery. If the law was to be read properly in Kenya and applied strictly, that would actually amount to voter bribery, because you are giving in return of. Why didn't you give 2-3 years ago in the middle of the term? Does it have to be related to the elections? Just go on a harmless middle of the term Thursday
and give facilitation.
And give facilitation in the middle of a market. They don't do that until election, and we talk about war chest, and war chest is very directly related to corruption, Joe.
On that note,
to
kazi.
Take it home.
Take it home, and
it's Jamila who does.
I've said, let me finish today. Mi ndo naanza.